The DOM. In the last unit, we introduced the concept of an API. One of the most important APIs that we need to understand when developing on the front end is the DOM, or the Document Object Model. The DOM can be an intimidating and bewildering topic to a lot of new developers, but it doesn't have to be. At its core, it's a simple idea. When the browser loads a new HTML document that has been requested from a server, remember that it is just opening a plain text file. It doesn't know anything about that file, it just sees text to begin with. The browser needs a way to make sense of this text file and turn it into the web page that we will eventually see in our browser window. It needs to break down every element that we've included in our HTML file and relate them to each other, so that it knows that, for example, the h1 header element is within the header element. Furthermore, it needs to allow the developer who created the web page to also interact with these elements within their page, so that they can allow their users to change things dynamically. The DOM, or Document Object Model, describes how web browsers should implement these requirements. More precisely, the DOM does two things. Firstly, it defines how our HTML documents are represented within the browser, and secondly, it defines how we can interact and manipulate this HTML representation dynamically. Representation. To represent our document internally, the browser creates something called a tree. A tree is a data structure that allows us to represent hierarchy. It's made up of a number of nodes, where each node has a single parent, and optionally a number of children. In the DOM tree, each node of the tree corresponds to one of our HTML elements. At the very top of the tree is the root node. In our case, this root node represents our entire HTML file, and it's called the document node. Manipulation. So the DOM tree represents our HTML document, but how do we interact with it? The DOM also defines a long list of functions that we can use when developing to manipulate the DOM tree. For example, we can create new elements and insert them into the DOM tree, and therefore into our page. We can remove elements from the tree dynamically. We can search for existing elements in a variety of flexible ways. For example, we might want to find all li elements on our page. When we find the elements we are looking for, we can then manipulate them, for example changing their CSS styling or their position on the page. There are a large number of operations you can perform on the DOM tree. So how exactly are we performing these operations? We perform them via JavaScript function calls from the browser. It's important to note here that the DOM isn't JavaScript, and that JavaScript isn't the DOM. The developers in Google, Microsoft and Mozilla then create implementations of this DOM standard in their browsers, and offer a library of JavaScript functions that can be called in JavaScript engines to manipulate the DOM. Furthermore, like we mentioned in the last lesson, these function calls are not a core part of JavaScript. They are only relevant in the browser ecosystem. With all of that in mind, in the next unit we're going to see how we actually interact with the DOM in the browser to change our page.